At 2:14 a.m., rain stitched silver lines across Canal Street, and Ivy Chen stood under the hospital's side awning with her shoes in one hand, her toes numb inside damp tights, and the ache in her lower back so constant it had begun to feel like a second spine. The fluorescent lights behind her made the puddles look metallic, hard and flat, and the city smelled of wet concrete, cooling engine oil, and the sweet, bitter coffee that had gone stale hours earlier in the interpreter lounge. She shifted her canvas tote higher on her shoulder, fished out the crumpled envelope she kept tucked behind her employee badge, and counted it again, even though she already knew the number. $43. Tips from grateful families who pressed folded bills into her palm when doctors left the room. Transit reimbursements from an overnight emergency consult in Queens. $43 against 3 months of overdue rent and an eviction notice folded so many times the corners had gone soft as cloth. The notice was still there, creased into quarters, pressed between her Metro card and a grocery receipt that listed eggs, rice, and a carton of milk she had put back at the last second. She slid it away before the paper could turn to pulp in the rain and stepped out from under the awning. Her shoes slapped against wet pavement as she crossed to the downtown train, each step sending a dull pulse through the arches of her feet. 12 hours in person, then 4 more on call because another interpreter had called in sick. And she had said yes because saying no had started to feel like a luxury for women who slept full nights and bought fruit without checking the price by the ounce. On the platform, she leaned her head against a tiled column and closed her eyes for a count of 10. Her stomach tightened with hunger, and then settled into a hollow, obedient quiet. Dinner had been a vending machine granola bar at 8:40 p.m., eaten standing up while translating a consent form for a son whose mother kept asking whether surgery meant she would wake up speaking the same words she had before. Ivy had answered every question with steady professional cadence, softened panic where she could, carried grief where she had to, and kept her voice even through all of it. Now the station wind lifted the hem of her scrub pants, cold enough to make her skin prickle, and she thought of the apartment 2 stops past Delancey, where Leo would be asleep with one sock half off, his school worksheet under his cheek, and his backpack already packed because she had trained him that routine was safety. By the second week of September, she had memorized the timing of every transfer between the hospital and home, which bodega marked down vegetables at midnight, and which courthouse clerk still answered calls 5 minutes before closing. None of it had made the numbers kinder. Guardianship filing fees, certified copies of their mother's death certificate, a retainer she could not afford for a family law attorney who had said, with apologetic eyes and a perfectly neutral tone, that judges liked stability and stability cost money. The legal aid office had taken her case list, but warned her the waiting list was long. 3 weeks, maybe 6. Meanwhile, she kept every document in a plastic folder under the sink, dry and flat and organized in chronological order, as if careful tabs could become leverage in a room where people in suits decided who counted as family. The train came shuddering into the station, half empty, lights buzzing. Ivy sat near the door and watched her reflection shake across dark windows. A slim face gone pale under hospital lighting, hair escaping the knot at the base of her neck, eyes ringed in bruised blue from too little sleep. At 28, she looked older in the glass and younger when she stood up straight, which made strangers underestimate her until she started speaking, and they realized she missed nothing. It was survival, not talent, that had sharpened her that way. She noticed intake forms left unsigned, subtle shifts in a patient's breathing before monitors caught up. The moment a social worker's polite smile turned brittle, the exact second a bill collector changed from, "Ms. Chen, we understand," to, "Ms. Chen, this is your final notice." The apartment building's front door stuck in humidity, and she had to shoulder it twice before it gave. The hallway smelled of bleach and old radiators. On the second-floor landing, a thin strip of fluorescent light leaked under Mrs. Alvarez's door, and somewhere down the hall, a baby coughed in short, tired bursts. Ivy unlocked 2B as quietly as she could and slipped inside. Their place was one room and a narrow galley kitchen, with peeling paint at the window frame and a view of a brick wall so close she could read the graffiti through rainwater. Leo slept on the pull-out sofa under a navy blanket printed with cartoon planets. One arm flung over his head in surrender. His homework packet sat open beside him, multiplication columns in careful pencil. 3 answers erased hard enough to leave dents in the paper. She set her tote down without a sound and crouched next to him. His hair still smelled faintly of the strawberry shampoo she bought in the kids' aisle when it was on sale. There was a healing scrape on his elbow from recess and a tiny ink mark at the edge of his thumbnail where a pen had exploded in class. Ordinary details, each one a relief she felt in her throat. She adjusted the blanket over his shoulder and stood up slowly so her knees would not crack. The apartment was cool enough that she kept her jacket on while she rinsed a cup in the sink and drank tap water in long, measured swallows, letting it sit in her mouth before she swallowed to trick her body into believing it was getting more than it was. On the fridge, held by a chipped yellow magnet, was the monthly grid she had made from printer paper at the library. School days in blue, night shifts in black, court deadlines circled in red. Thursday had 3 circles and an asterisk. Submit guardianship affidavit by 4 p.m. Friday had 1 word she had written in cramped capitals and underlined twice: rent. She touched the edge of the paper, then reached for her phone. 4 missed calls from a number she knew by heart and never saved. 1 voicemail from management, polite and distant, reminding her that non-payment proceedings moved on schedule regardless of hardship declarations. A text from her supervisor confirming she had covered enough extra hours this month to avoid being cut from weekend rotation. Another text, unknown number, time-stamped 11:07 p.m. Need Mandarin interpreter tomorrow evening. Formal event. 6 p.m. to close. Business/legal language. Flat rate $600. Transportation included. Reply yes within 1 hour. She read it twice, then a third time, until the numbers stopped blurring. 600 would not erase 3 months of debt, but it would stop one fire from spreading this week. It would buy time with the landlord, pay filing fees she had postponed, and maybe, if she stretched everything until it thinned, cover Leo's inhaler refill due next Tuesday. She typed yes, erased it, typed again, and pressed send before fear could negotiate her out of it. A second message arrived almost immediately with a contact name and venue details. Pellegrini Foundation Annual Benefit. Tribeca. Black tie required, discretion expected. Discretion expected. She stared at the phrase until it became abstract, then locked her phone and set it face down. She did not have black tie anything. She had 1 plain black dress bought from a thrift store 6 years earlier for a memorial service. Hem repaired by hand, zipper temperamental in humid weather. She had 1 pair of heels with a worn sole and a scuff she hid by standing with her left foot slightly behind the right. She had a navy blazer from a department store clearance rack, sleeves half an inch too short if she raised her arms. If the room was full of people who noticed labels and watches and bloodlines, they would notice her immediately, and then decide she did not belong. She had learned that kind of room before she ever entered it. Still, it was work. Work meant language, and language was the one place where she could stand on level ground no matter who sat across from her. She could hold legal nuance without flattening it, carry medical fear without making promises she could not keep, and keep her own face neutral while other people revealed exactly what they believed power sounded like. That skill had paid their electric bill in February and Leo's winter coat in January. It had paid for a pair of school sneakers in August after his old ones split at the toe. It had paid for rice and bus fare and late fees and all the unglamorous scaffolding that kept two people upright after loss. She took the plastic folder from under the sink and spread the papers across the small kitchen table in neat stacks. Death certificate copies, school enrollment letter, pediatric records, proof of residence, her pay stubs clipped by month. She added the new assignment confirmation to the top with a sticky note that read, "Income verification pending." Her handwriting got tighter when she was tired, letters leaning forward as if they were bracing into wind. At 3:06 a.m., she set an alarm for 7 o'clock, then another for 7:05 because she had once slept through the first and could not risk that again. She left a note for Leo in block letters he could read at a glance. Breakfast in fridge. Wear your rain jacket. I'll walk you to school. When she finally lay down on the narrow bed behind the folding screen, rain tapped against the window in soft, uneven bursts. Her calves throbbed, her shoulders burned, her eyelids felt gritty, and her mind refused to slow. Skipping from rent to court to uniforms to subway delays to whether the thrift store dress still fit after too many weeks of meals built around whatever was cheapest and fastest. In the dark, she placed one hand flat against her sternum and counted breaths until her pulse settled. Tomorrow would be one more shift, one more room, one more set of people who needed words they could trust. Then another day, and another. She did not need luck. She needed 48 steady hours, enough money to keep a door open, and the strength to walk through it, carrying Leo with her. Rain kept tapping the window long after Ivy's breathing evened out, and sleep came in thin strips that tore every time she turned. When the first alarm buzzed at 7 o'clock, her arm found the phone on instinct and silenced it before Leo stirred. At 7:05, the second alarm chimed, softer and higher, and this time she sat up fast enough to feel her spine protest. The room was cold. Her socks from last night hung over the radiator, still damp at the toes. She stood anyway, pulled on yesterday's sweatshirt, and moved through the apartment in the practiced sequence that kept mornings from collapsing. Kettle on, oatmeal packet, lunchbox, inhaler check, school folder, her badge clipped to the inside of her tote so she would not forget it in a rush. Leo blinked awake with one cheek creased from the worksheet and pushed himself upright under the navy blanket. Is it still raining? Less than last night, she said, spooning oatmeal into a bowl and adding the last half banana in careful slices so it looked like more than it was. Rain jacket anyway. He nodded, already reaching for the multiplication page to erase one answer and write another. At 9, he had started correcting himself before anyone asked. Ivy watched him from the sink while she rinsed 2 mugs and tried not to stare at the orange final notice stamped on the envelope she had tucked under a cookbook by the fridge. Her body still felt heavy from the double shift, but the shape of today was simple and sharp. Walk Leo to school, take a daytime phone consult from the hospital, sleep for 1 hour if she could, then become the polished version of herself required by people who use the word discretion as if it were a service they paid for by the hour. By 8:22, she was outside PS 134 with Leo's small hand in hers, crossing around puddles that mirrored traffic lights in broken red streaks. Parents clustered under umbrellas. A crossing guard shouted toward a delivery van. Leo shifted his backpack and looked up at her with the grave expression he wore when he knew she was counting money in her head. "You're working tonight, too?" "Just one assignment," she said. "Fancy event. Good pay." He squinted. "Like rich people fancy?" She smiled despite the knot in her throat. "Exactly that kind. Don't let them be rude to you?" The words were so direct she had to look away for a second, pretending to check the crossing light. "I can handle rude." she said, and squeezed his shoulder before he ran to join the line at the school doors. Back home, she showered fast, then sat at the kitchen table with her legal folder open and the assignment confirmation printed on library paper that had already started to curl at the corners. Noon brought a brief hospital call to interpret for a post-op consult, and she switched into clinical precision while balancing her phone against a chipped sugar jar. At 2:10, she hung up, set 3 alarms, and lay down fully dressed. She slept 43 minutes before a siren outside snapped her awake. By 4:35, the apartment looked like a storm had passed through it. The thrift store black dress hung from the shower rod while she steamed it with the kettle. One heel sat on newspaper while she pressed clear nail polish over a scuffed seam to keep it from splitting for one more night. She pinned the blazer sleeves at the cuffs so the length looked intentional instead of short. Her only pair of pearl studs, a gift from her mother for high school graduation, went in last. In the cracked mirror above the sink, she looked composed from the shoulders up and exhausted everywhere else. She lifted her chin until her posture matched the face. The car's service voucher from the event was real, and the black sedan arrived at 5:11 sharp, idling outside 2B like a mistake parked on the wrong block. The driver held the rear door without comment, while Mrs. Alvarez watched through her peephole. Ivy slid in, gave the venue name she had already memorized, and pressed her fingers together to stop them trembling. Downtown streets narrowed into Tribeca glass and stone, then opened again in front of the Pellegrini Foundation building, where warm light spilled over wet steps and men with umbrellas moved guests under a covered entry in swift, seamless motions. Inside, marble reflected chandelier light in fractured gold patterns. Coats were whisked away before she finished giving her name. A woman with a headset and a clipboard glanced at Ivy's shoes, then at her face, then at the credential packet, her smile never changing while her tone sharpened by a degree. "Interpreter support is through Service Corridor C after first course," she said. "Stay close to the wall until called. You'll be at table 12 for donor introductions and contract clarifications." Ivy took the badge and signed the confidentiality sheet. "Understood." The woman leaned in just enough for perfume to cut through the room's citrus clean air. "No independent conversations with principals. If a guest asks a question outside assigned scope, redirect to legal counsel. We have strict protocol tonight." Authority pressure disguised as logistics. Ivy gave a single nod and moved where directed. The ballroom looked like a magazine spread designed by people who had never worried about bills. White orchids in cut crystal vases, silver place settings spaced with mathematical precision, wine already breathing in decanters that probably cost more than her month of groceries. At table 12, 2 men from Shanghai construction firms and 1 older donor from Queens waited with varying degrees of impatience. She introduced herself in Mandarin and English, voice level, diction clear, and watched relief settle across one face while suspicion held on another. Work steadied her. Language was ground she could trust. For the first 20 minutes, the friction was manageable. A donor who interrupted, a junior associate who spoke too quickly and then blamed her when she asked him to repeat a clause number. A joke about translation tax, followed by laughter from people who had never had to hear themselves through someone else's mouth. She carried each line across intact, preserving tone without adding heat. When one businessman switched to a regional idiom, she adjusted in real time and saw his posture shift, a reluctant respect in the way he stopped testing her. Then the humiliation came clean and public. A broad-shouldered guest in a tailored charcoal suit arrived late, dropped into the empty seat beside the donor, and listened for under a minute before waving his hand in her direction like dismissing smoke. "Can we get someone with neutral English?" he asked in front of the table, smiling into his wine. "No offense. Her accent is heavy." The words landed hard enough that her ears rang. Around them, Crystal chimed as servers refreshed glasses. No one at the table corrected him. The donor stared at his napkin. One of the Shanghai men looked at Ivy directly, waiting for her cue. Professional protocol held because it had to. Ivy met the rude guest's eyes and kept her voice calm. "I am the assigned interpreter for this table, sir. If you prefer, I can relay through event counsel for quality verification." A beat of silence. The man's jaw twitched, smile fixed. "Fine. Proceed." She turned back to the contract language and did not let her cadence change. Her throat felt tight, but each term came out precise. Indemnity timeline, customs valuation dispute, delivery schedule revised to quarter end. She noticed every tiny reaction as she spoke. The rude guest stopped looking at her and started looking at the numbers. The donor sat a fraction straighter. One of the Chinese executives gave a brief nod when she preserved a legal nuance that would have cost them leverage if flattened into easy English. Respect arrived quietly, late and partial, but it arrived. By 7:03 p.m., first course had cleared, and the room's social temperature had shifted from formal courtesy into bargaining theater. Waiters moved in synchronized lines. A string quartet played near the terrace doors. Ivy stepped back from table 12 to let dessert forks be placed, flexing her fingers under the tray stand, where no one could see how stiff her wrist had gone from holding her notepad. A floor manager appeared at her shoulder. "Miss Chen, we need you near the North Corridor for an ad hoc conversation. Bring your materials." She followed through a narrower passage where the carpet thickened and guest noise thinned to a low, expensive murmur. The class contrast felt sharper away from the crowd. Polished walnut walls, framed black and white photographs, security cameras recessed into crown molding so elegantly they looked decorative. Her thrift store heel caught once in a seam, and she recovered before stumbling, heat rising to her face. At the service entrance, a valet stood half in shadow with a cigarette between two shaking fingers, trying to light it against the draft. The flame skipped, died, flared again. He glanced up when he saw Ivy, and then looked away too quickly, as if eye contact itself might become evidence. His cuff was damp from rain to the elbow. Not unusual on a storm night. The tremor was 10 feet away. A man in an impeccable black suit, security chief by the coiled earpiece and the way staff moved around him, spoke into his wrist mic without raising his voice. "Lock loading bay 2. Confirm west stair clear. No one uses service lift without my authorization." His tone was clipped, each word stripped of excess. He caught Ivy watching, assessed her badge in one sweep, and gave the smallest gesture toward the corridor ahead. Permission or warning, she could not tell. The floor manager who had summoned her was gone. Ivy adjusted her notepad against her chest and kept walking, pulse rising in hard, uneven beats. The north corridor opened into a quieter wing where the music from the ballroom was nearly gone, replaced by the hum of climate control and distant thunder rolling over the river. A door on the right stood ajar when every other door was closed. Warm light spilled through the gap onto the carpet in a narrow band. She slowed. Inside the room, voices had just been talking. She could feel the shape of conversation in the air. And then, as her shadow touched the threshold, it cut off all at once. The silence that followed was dense and deliberate. The kind people made when they knew someone had arrived who was not supposed to hear the next line. A leather portfolio lay on a side table just outside the open door, embossed with the Pellegrini crest in understated black on black, as if it had been set down in a hurry and forgotten. Ivy recognized it from the head table where she had translated 10 minutes earlier. Behind the door, a man said something too low to catch. Another answered with a single word and the scrape of a chair leg. Footsteps shifted, not toward the exit, but into position. Ivy's skin prickled under her blazer. She should have turned around, found the floor manager, and handed the portfolio to anyone with a headset and authority. Instead, she picked it up because protocol was habit, and habit had kept her employed through worse rooms than this. Her knuckles were white against the leather edge by the time she lifted her hand and tapped once on the doorframe. "Excuse me," she said, voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. A portfolio was left outside. No answer came immediately. Thunder cracked closer, and somewhere behind her in the corridor, the security chief's voice rose through the earpiece channel in two sharp commands she could not fully hear. Then, a different voice from inside the room, low and controlled, said, "Send her in." Ivy pushed the door wider with her knuckles and stepped into a private dining room that looked nothing like the ballroom she had left behind. The ceilings were lower, the light warmer, the tables smaller and set for 6 instead of 200. But the same money lived in every surface. Hand-rubbed walnut, crystal water goblets, linen so heavy it fell in straight architectural folds. The room smelled faintly of bergamot and old wood, with a metallic edge underneath that turned her stomach before she identified it. A man in a white shirt sat in a chair near the sideboard, his wrists secured in front of him with a plastic tie, one cheek swollen and darkening. 2 security men held him upright while he swayed. No one at the table was eating. At the far end, Luca Pellegrini stood with one hand resting on the back of a chair. Black suit perfectly fitted, tie loosened by exactly half an inch, as if even disarray followed rules in his world. He was taller than she had expected from across the ballroom, broad-shouldered, still in a way that made everyone else look careless. His eyes landed on the portfolio in her hands, then moved to her face and stayed there for one measured second that felt longer than the walk from the door. "Close it," he said. She turned and pushed the door shut behind her. The latch clicked with a small, final sound that made her pulse kick harder. "I found this outside," she said, lifting the leather portfolio. Her voice came out steady, and she was grateful for that one thing. "I thought it belonged to your table." A silver-haired man seated to Luca's right took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Across from him, the security chief from the corridor spoke into his cuff mic without looking away from Ivy. "Civilian in room. Confirm protocol." The tied man gave a dry laugh that ended in a cough. "Civilian," he repeated, looking at Ivy with eyes gone watery from pain and panic. "That's what you call witnesses now?" Luca's gaze shifted to him, and the room tightened around the movement. "You call yourself a witness, Paolo?" His voice was low, smooth, not raised. The kind that made people lean in because they understood volume was not where danger lived. "You signed manifests. You rerouted containers. You sold routes with my family name on them." Paolo swallowed and tried to sit straighter. "I can explain." "You've been explaining for 20 minutes. The security chief stepped in toward Ivy, palm open for the portfolio. She handed it over automatically, aware of her own breathing, aware of the cold creeping into her fingers despite the warm room. The chief placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were shipping manifests, customs declarations, and a printout marked with red circles and initials she did not recognize. Paolo's expression changed when he saw it, bravado draining away in real time. By 7:19 p.m., thunder rolled directly above the building, close enough to vibrate faintly through the glass. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and shut. In the room, no one moved. The silver-haired man scanned a page and looked up at Luca. The missing ledger entries correspond to 3 nights at Pier 41. Same pattern we saw in Genoa. He had help. Paolo's jaw worked. I was told it was insurance. Short term. No one gets hurt. Luca tilted his head by a degree. No one gets hurt is a sentence men use after they've already sold someone. Ivy felt her throat tighten. She should not be hearing any of this. She should have left the portfolio with a floor manager and returned to table 12. She took half a step back toward the door, and one of the security men shifted to block it without touching her. "I need to return to my assignment," she said, aiming the words at no one in particular. "I'm only contracted for language support." Luca looked at her again. The control in his face did not crack, but something in his attention sharpened, as if he were recalculating a board where a piece had moved unexpectedly. "Your name?" She almost said she had already given it at check-in, then stopped herself. "Ivy Chen." "Miss Chen," he said, formal and precise. "What languages did you hear outside this room before you entered?" Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. "English. I couldn't make out full sentences. One line in Italian from inside, I think. Not enough context to translate accurately." The silver-haired man gave a grim, approving nod at her wording. Luca asked, "Did anyone speak to you in the corridor?" "No." "Did anyone ask you to come here by name?" She thought of the floor manager who had disappeared. "No, I was redirected." "By whom?" "A woman with a headset and clipboard. Blonde bob, black dress, event staff credentials." The security chief touched his earpiece. "Find her. Quietly." Paolo leaned forward against the restraining grip. "She's not staff," he blurted. "She was at the docks Tuesday. One of the security men tightened his hold and cut him off. Luca did not raise his voice. "You speak when I allow it." The rebuke dropped like a blade onto stone. Paolo went silent. Ivy stood very still, every instinct telling her to become smaller and leave faster. But there was nowhere in the room to put either instinct. The silver-haired man closed the portfolio and slid it toward Luca. A corner of a photo had slipped loose from the stack. A loading bay at night, time-stamped, with a familiar figure in profile near a van. The image was grainy, but the woman's posture matched the floor manager's clipped efficiency exactly. The security chief swore under his breath. Camera 6 caught her twice. She ghosted the guest list. Luca's eyes moved to the photo and then to Ivy, and when he spoke again, his words were directed to her alone. "You are done for the night." She blinked. "My table still needs..." "Your table will survive without you." He turned to the chief. "Get her paid now. Full rate plus hazard premium." Ivy heard the phrase and felt a cold wave move through her chest. Hazard premium was not a gala word. Paolo gave another cracked laugh, then spat a thin line of blood onto the floor beside his shoe. "Send her home and she dies in a stairwell by dawn." The room erupted in motion before Ivy processed the sentence. One guard shoved Paolo back into the chair. Another stepped between Ivy and the restrained man, broad back filling her line of sight. The chief barked into his mic. "Sweep corridor C and service exit. No civilian movement without escort." Ivy's body locked, fear hitting like a sudden drop in an elevator. Her fingers went numb first, then her knees threatened to fold. She had interpreted emergency consent in trauma bays without shaking, had spoken through panic for strangers, and held their words steady while monitors screamed. But this fear was personal and immediate, in a way those nights never were. She saw Leo's face in her mind so clearly, it hurt. Luca moved then, fast and exact, stepping around the table until he stood 3 feet from her, close enough that she could see the faint nick along his jaw from an old scar. "Look at me," he said. She did. His tone stayed controlled, but the edge under it was unmistakable. You saw a room you were not meant to see. You heard enough to be useful to the wrong people. That makes you vulnerable now. Do you understand me? She wanted to argue details, to insist she knew nothing that mattered, to demand who wrong people meant and why his men had allowed any of this near a charity event at all. Instead, she heard herself say, "I have to pick up my brother at 9. The words shifted something in his expression, not softness exactly, but a recalibration of priority. How old? 9. He nodded once, decision already made. Chief, add minor extraction. School and residence coverage tonight. I can't authorize strangers around him, Ivy said, voice rising for the first time. I don't even know your names. You will? Luca did not look away from her. But if you walk out alone, you may not get the chance. Stay with my security team for 48 hours, then decide what you do next. 48 hours. The number landed with brutal clarity. Too specific to be improvisation, too short to be comfort. She shook her head, backing half a step until her shoulder hit the doorframe. I can't disappear. I have court filings tomorrow, guardianship paperwork. If I miss that window, then we don't miss it. He turned his head slightly. Counsel. The silver-haired man was already standing. I'll call a clerk I trust. We can e-file before midnight if we have the affidavits. Ivy stared at him, stunned by the speed. Her world moved through wait lists and hold music in offices that closed at 4. This one moved like doors unlocked before anyone touched them. A hard buzz sounded in the chief's earpiece. He listened, jaw tightening. Unmarked bike outside loading bay. Rider wearing event livery, no credentials, bolted when approached. Luca's gaze went flint hard. Then we're out of time. What happened next unfolded in clipped, precise commands that snapped through the room like electrical current. Lights down in this corridor. Lock east stairwell. Pull camera feeds to mobile. 2 on Miss Chen, 1 on the child route, 1 on me. Move. The guards shifted instantly. One opened the door. Another took position at Ivy's side, not touching, ready to steer. The chief held out a small black phone and a folded card. Direct line, he said. My team answers first ring. Keep it on you. Ivy took them without thinking. The card was thick, unmarked except for a number and a single initial in silver, M. Wait, she said, catching on a practical panic. Leo's after-school program signs out only to listed guardians. They won't release him to... Then you go. Luca cut in. With my escort. No deviations. She looked at him, at the men around him, at Paolo slumped in his chair with fear now bigger than pain on his face. Her mind split in competing tracks. Run and hide. Comply and survive, reject and protect Leo herself. For one suspended second, she could not choose any of them. Luca stepped closer, lowering his voice until only she could hear. Ms. Chen, take your pay, leave the city, and disappear for 48 hours if you want to keep breathing. The line should have sounded like a threat. In his mouth, it sounded like an order issued at the edge of disaster. Blunt, because there was no time left for gentler language. She swallowed against a dry throat. And if I refuse? His answer came without hesitation. Then I assign 6 men instead of 2, and you hate me for a week. But you and your brother stay alive. In the corridor, lights dimmed to half. Guest music from the ballroom swelled and faded behind closed doors, absurdly elegant against the tactical voices in earpieces. Ivy let the security officer guide her into motion, each step unsteady at first, then firmer as purpose replaced shock. At the junction before service elevator C, a young accountant from the gala staff stood pressed to the wall, pale and shaking, clutching a tablet to her chest. Ivy met her eyes for an instant and saw the same realization there. The night had tilted, and none of them could pretend that they were still at dinner. The chief appeared beside Ivy long enough to place a sealed envelope in her hand. Payment authorization, car assignment, emergency contact protocol. Do not open it in the hall. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Behind her, Luca gave another chain of orders she could still hear over the thrum in her ears. Scrub guest footage for her image. Remove her name from staffing logs tonight. Find the fake floor manager. Quiet capture if possible. The elevator doors slid open. Ivy stepped inside with 2 security escorts, one facing out, one facing in. Just before the doors closed, she looked back. Luca stood in the corridor's lowered light, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on her with a watchfulness that felt less like possession than accountability. He gave one curt nod, as if sealing terms neither of them had chosen. The doors shut, and the car began to descend, carrying her away from Crystal and Linen and into Rain, protocol. And 48 hours she could not afford to take, but could no longer afford to refuse. The elevator hummed downward, and Ivy kept her back against the mirrored wall because her knees were still unreliable. One security officer stood at the control panel with his thumb hovering near the emergency stop. The other angled his body between her and the doors, as if danger could slip through steel seams. The sealed envelope in her hand had gone damp at the edges from her grip. Her pulse was loud enough that she barely heard the officer facing out speak into his mic. "Packages with us. Route red. Lobby dark transfer." A voice answered through static, clipped and calm. "Copy. Vehicle staged. Child route active." Ivy flinched at the word child and forced herself to breathe from her diaphragm the way she coached panicked family members in consultation rooms. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It helped enough to keep her voice usable. "I'm not a package," she said. The officer looked at her, expression respectful but unchanged. "Understood, Ms. Chen. You're still staying between us." The doors opened into a service bay instead of the main lobby. Concrete. Fluorescent strips. Rain hammering somewhere beyond the loading gate. 2 black SUVs idled with headlights off, and 3 more men in dark coats watched every entrance, with the stillness of people trained to move fast. One stepped forward, offered her a matte umbrella, and guided her to the rear vehicle without touching her arm. "Phone, please," he said. She handed him her personal phone, then instantly regretted it. He scanned the lock screen and gave it back. "Keep yours. Use this for us." He tapped the small black phone the chief had given her. "Line is clean." "Leo," she said, "I need to call the program." "Already done by counsel with your authorization on file from emergency contact paperwork. You still do in-person sign-out." The efficiency made her skin prickle. In her world, nothing happened this quickly unless someone was bleeding. She slid into the SUV, and both escorts followed, one in front, one beside her in back. The door shut with a heavy seal that erased most of the rain noise. On the seat between them sat a compact medical kit and a legal-size folder with her name printed on a white tab. The driver pulled out without using the main street. Ivy looked down at the sealed envelope, broke it open with her thumb, and found a cashier's check, temporary protection paperwork, and a 1-page protocol list written in plain language. Stay visible to assigned team. No solo transit. No social media posts. No tagged locations. If approached, call first, answer questions later. At the bottom, signed in tight black ink, M. Rinaldi. "Who is M?" she asked. "Matteo Rinaldi," said the man beside her. "Security chief." She folded the sheet once, then again, each crease exact to keep her hands from shaking. He said full rate plus hazard premium. The officer in front answered without turning. "Processed. Funds clear tonight." By 7:41 p.m., the rain had thickened into hard diagonal lines that blurred tail lights into red smears across wet asphalt. The SUV stopped 2 blocks from Leo's after-school building. One officer scanned the sidewalk, another stepped out first, and only then did they move her to the entrance. Inside, fluorescent school light flattened everything. Children's art taped to cinder block walls, a rack of damp coats. The normality hit her harder than the private room upstairs had. Mastaus. Patel from the program looked up from the sign-out binder, saw Ivy's face, then the men behind her, and paused with a pen lifted. "Long shift?" Ms. Patel asked gently. "Long night?" Ivy said, signing her name and adding the time with a hand she forced steady. Leo came out carrying his backpack and a paper model bridge made from craft sticks. His hair flattened on one side from where he had rested against the wall during reading period. He saw the men and went still. "G?" His voice dropped. "What happened?" "Car trouble at the event," she said, the first plausible lie that arrived. "They sent security to make sure we get home safe." One escort crouched to Leo's eye level, keeping his distance. "I'm Owen. We're helping your sister tonight." Leo studied him, then looked at Ivy again. She gave a small nod. He accepted it, slid his hand into hers, and only then let them guide him outside. Back at the apartment building, protocol tightened. 2 officers entered first and cleared the one-room unit, while Ivy and Leo waited on the landing with another guard by the stairwell. Mrs. Alvarez opened her door 2 inches, eyes wide, and Ivy managed a quick smile that reassured no one. After 30 seconds, Owen called them in. 5 minutes for essentials, he said. Medic check-in vehicle. Ivy moved fast. Leo's inhaler, spacer, and nebulizer mask into a zip pouch. Guardianship folder from under the sink. School uniforms, 2 changes of clothes, medications, phone charger, a framed photo of their mother from the fridge door. She hesitated over the chipped yellow magnet and left it behind. Leo grabbed his astronomy paperback and the stuffed fabric wolf he pretended he had outgrown. At the table, her old phone buzzed with an unknown number. She answered, bracing. "Ms. Chen, Daniel Rice speaking." The silver-haired counsel from the private room. "We have your affidavit draft in front of us. I need verbal confirmation on 2 items for emergency e-filing tonight." She pressed the phone tighter. "I'm listening." "Date of your mother's passing and current minor resident status." She gave both. Reese repeated each answer precisely, then said, "Filing submitted within 20 minutes. You'll receive stamped copies electronically and hard copy by courier in the morning. Do not miss any calls from this number." The call ended. External contact resolved. Action in motion. For 1 second, her throat closed with relief, so sharp it felt like pain. They were out in 4 minutes. The medic met them in the back of the SUVs as they pulled away from the block. She was a woman in navy scrubs under a rain shell. Hair braided tight, voice practical. "I'm Tessa. I need to check you both." "I'm fine," Ivy said automatically. Tessa lifted a brow. "Your pupils are uneven from adrenaline, and your right hand is guarding your left wrist. You're not fine. I'm still gentle." She checked Leo first, quick and kind. Lungs, pulse, temperature, inhaler status. No immediate issues. Leo relaxed enough to explain his bridge project, while she listened like it mattered. Then she turned to Ivy and examined the wrist that had been torqued in the corridor scramble, where bruising had begun to bloom beneath the sleeve line. She palpated lightly. Ivy hissed once despite herself. "Sprain, maybe hairline if force was strong," Tessa said. "I'm splinting for now and arranging imaging when we reach safe site." Ivy froze. "No hospital." "Private radiology on secure call," Tessa said. "No waiting room, no public log." The splint went on, firm and clean. Tessa handed her electrolyte packets and protein bars from a sealed pouch, then one to Leo. "Eat, both of you. Low blood sugar and fear are a bad pair." The city thinned as they crossed north and then east, leaving the glittering towers for quieter streets lined with old brick and shadowed trees. Their destination was not a penthouse, but a narrow townhouse with blackout curtains, reinforced locks, and understated cameras tucked under the cornice. Inside, the warmth smelled faintly of cedar and disinfectant. A house manager in her 60s met them in the foyer. "I'm Signora Bellini. You'll call me Rosa if you prefer." Her accent was soft, her posture military straight. "Second floor suite is prepared. Child room adjacent. Kitchen is stocked. Rules are simple. If a guard says stay in a room, you stay in the room." Leo nodded first. Ivy followed. The suite was small by luxury standards and larger than any place Ivy had called home in years. 2 bedrooms, 1 sitting room, thick rugs, heavy curtains, no visible windows from the street. On the coffee table sat bottled water, a humidifier, a children's puzzle still in plastic, and an envelope labeled Chen Family Temp File. Immediate care arranged intangible objects. Her chest tightened again, this time from the violence of being looked after so efficiently. Owen stood at the doorway and delivered orders with respectful formality. 2 guards remain on this floor, 1 at street level. You don't open to knocks unless we confirm by line. Breakfast at 7 unless you request earlier. Council update expected tonight. Mr. Pellegrini will brief you when the perimeter is stable." "Will he come here?" Ivy asked. "If required," Owen said. "For now, he stays at primary site." Leo tugged her sleeve. "Can I shower?" She blinked, dragged back to immediate needs. "Yes. Warm, not hot. Use your inhaler after." He disappeared into the bathroom with his wolf tucked under one arm. When the door shut, the room went quiet enough that Ivy could hear the rain against the upper windows. Tessa reappeared with ice and anti-inflammatory tablets, made her swallow both, and left strict instructions for wrist elevation. Ivy sat on the edge of the sofa, splinted hand in her lap, and realized she had not eaten since midday. She opened a protein bar and forced herself through it in small bites. The black phone rang at 8:26. She answered on the first tone. "Ms. Chen." Luca's voice came through low, controlled, stripped of everything except function. "Status." She looked around the secure room, as if he could see it through the line. "Leo is safe. Medic checked us both. Council says filing submitted." "Good." A pause. Then, "Did anyone follow from your building?" "Not that I saw." "That's not your job to see," he said. "It's ours." She almost snapped back that seeing was exactly how she had survived this long, then heard the underlying strain in his cadence. Tension held behind discipline. "Where are you?" "Handling containment." From somewhere near his end came muffled voices and a door shutting hard. He spoke again, quieter. "Listen carefully. You are under Pellegrini protection for 48 hours, not as a favor. As protocol tied to a live threat chain, you don't test perimeter. You don't negotiate with unknown numbers. Do you understand me?" The command should have sparked anger. It did. but it braided with relief and exhaustion until she could not separate them. "I understand," she said. "I don't like it." "Not required?" He was about to end the call when she heard herself ask, "Why 48 exactly?" Silence held for 2 beats, filled by faint static and rain. "When my father was alive," Lucas said, voice flattening into old memory. "A logistics clerk witnessed a route meeting and went home unescorted. We secured him the next morning. Too late for his wife." He stopped there, then added with precision, 48 hours covers first retaliation window and communication lag to hired crews. It's not arbitrary." The words shifted the geometry of the night. His threat at the door rewrote itself in her mind as something blunter and less cruel. A survival rule learned at cost. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it despite everything. "Don't be sorry." The controlled edge returned. "Be alive." The line clicked off. Leo came out in clean pajamas borrowed from the stack Rosa had somehow stocked in the right approximate size. His hair was wet at the temples, and he carried the fabric wolf like a treaty flag. He climbed beside Ivy, leaned into her uninjured shoulder, and studied the splint. "Did someone do that to you?" he asked. She swallowed. "Someone grabbed too hard." "Are they coming here?" "No," she said, then corrected it for honesty without terror. "They won't get in." He considered that and accepted it. After a moment, he said, "The men downstairs are scary." "They're meant to be," she answered. "Not to us." At 9:03, the black phone rang again. Rice this time, brisk and precise. Emergency guardianship petition filed and time-stamped. Clerk accepted supplemental exhibits. You have a hearing slot preserved. I sent copies to your email and the secure printer on site. Do not lose those documents. "I won't," she said. When the call ended, she opened the Chen family temp file on the table. Inside were printed copies of her filing confirmation, a map of the townhouse exits, medication schedules for Leo, and a handwritten note from Rosa in blue ink. If the child wakes frightened, kitchen light stays on all night. Ask for mint tea. Ivy set the papers down very carefully. In one day, she had moved from begging for courthouse minutes to having legal documents delivered to a guarded house by people she barely knew. The power imbalance remained brutal, but its direction had turned just enough to keep her and Leo standing. Leo yawned against her shoulder. She guided him to bed in the adjacent room, tucked the blanket around him, and left the door open a crack. Back in the sitting room, she lowered herself onto the sofa, wrist elevated on a pillow, shoes finally off. Rain continued its steady percussion over the city. Downstairs, a guard's radio murmured and then fell silent. Her phone lit once with a new message from an unknown number, no text, only an image attachment. She did not open it. She used the black line exactly as ordered. "Owen," she said when he answered. "I have an unknown ping." "We saw it," he replied immediately. "Delete without opening. Source is being traced." She deleted it and watched the screen go dark. Protective walls, procedural voices, immediate care, a child breathing evenly in the next room. None of it felt soft. All of it felt necessary. She sat awake in borrowed safety, listening to the house hold its perimeter, and understood that 48 hours had already started counting down. The house held steady around her, but Ivy did not. She sat on the sofa with her splinted wrist on a pillow and listened to rain strike the glass in patient bursts, counting between impacts like she could pace her heart with weather. The floorboard outside the suite creaked once, then again in a deliberate pattern that announced trained movement, not threat. Owen tapped lightly and stepped in when she answered, his expression unchanged. "Trace came back on that ping," he said. "Spoofed routing, prepaid device. Origin likely 2 blocks from your old building. No breach here? Likely. The word lodged under her ribs. So he knows where I lived. He knew that already, Owen said. Now he knows we're moving faster. Leo shifted in the next room, blanket rustling, then settled. Ivy nodded and looked at the secure phone in her lap. Do I need to wake him and move again? Not tonight. Owen hesitated, then added, Mr. Pellegrini is en route for a briefing. 10 minutes. She almost said no. No more orders, no more controlled voices telling her where to stand and when to breathe. But exhaustion flattened the protest before it formed. She just said, He doesn't wake Leo. He won't. The rain softened from hard percussion to a steady hiss along the townhouse facade. And Luca arrived without entourage noise. Just the quiet displacement of air when someone with authority entered a room, and everyone else recalibrated around him. He wore the same dark suit, jacket replaced, tie gone. A thin line of damp at his collar, where rain had caught him between car and door. Ivy felt the reaction before she approved it. A sharp awareness that traveled from her throat to her stomach and sat there like a lit match. He stopped 2 steps inside the suite and took in details in one sweep. Her wrist, the uneaten half of the protein bar, the open legal file, the lamp left low so Leo could sleep. Status? He asked. Leo is down. Wrist is splinted. Counsel filed. Her voice sounded formal, and she hated that it did. Good. His gaze lingered on the splint. Any dizziness? No. Headache? Manageable. He moved closer and crouched in front of her so his voice would carry less. The controlled force was still there, but quieter now, shaped for a child sleeping in the next room and a woman running on adrenaline fumes. I need you to hear this without interruption. Adrian Voss put out a contract this afternoon on anyone connected to the missing ledger. Staff, drivers, translators, vendors, anyone who could identify chain changes. His jaw tightened. My 48-hour order was blunt because there was no safe way to explain it in that room. Fear came first, clean and cold. Attraction came second, unwanted and immediate. Because he was close enough for her to see a faint abrasion on his knuckles, and because his hands, dangerous hands, stayed open on his knees, as if asking permission from the space between them. The conflict made her angry on principle. You don't get to reduce me to protocol, she whispered. You don't get to say disappear like I'm disposable. Something dark moved behind his eyes, then steadied. Disposable is the opposite of what I'm saying. Then use words that don't sound like a threat. I used the words that kept people alive in my world. She laughed once under her breath, no humor in it. Your world, that's exactly the problem. He absorbed that without flinching. Then define the terms. The invitation startled her more than any order had. Ivy leaned forward, pulse still uneven, and kept her voice low so it would not carry to Leo's room. My brother is first. Not your operation, not your revenge, not your timeline. First, I choose counsel independent of your payroll, even if your counsel files emergency motions tonight. I keep my hospital job. I decide where I sleep after the threat window. No cage disguised as protection. Luca held her gaze through all of it, expression unreadable except for a muscle ticking once at his temple. Agreed on the child. Agreed on independent counsel. Rice can coordinate, not control. Job remains yours. Housing after 48 is your decision with risk briefing. He paused. And no cages. The speed of agreement disarmed her almost as much as his proximity did. She had prepared to fight for every line. That's it? That's not it. He straightened slightly. In return, you do not improvise alone. You do not answer unknown numbers. You do not leave perimeter to prove you can. Competence isn't in question. Exposure is. The words should have felt insulting. Instead, they felt accurate in a way that made her throat burn. She looked away first, toward the legal folder on the coffee table. "There's more," she said. "About Adrian." Luca waited. Ivy opened the file and pulled out copies she had not shown anyone outside court intake. Debt contracts with signatures that looked like her mother's until you studied stroke pressure and date stamps. Collection notices timed to hit right before guardianship deadlines. She set them between them like contaminated evidence. He forged these after she died, used her name to build debt he could point to in custody filings. Every time I got close to stabilizing, a new notice appeared. He kept telling me judges don't place kids with women drowning in liabilities. Luca took the top page, scanning with surgical focus. The stillness in him changed temperature, controlled rage settling like iron. When he spoke, his voice was barely contained. "He leveraged your mother's death to pressure access to your brother." "Yes." "He touched Leo today." Ivy nodded once. The memory tightened every muscle she had. Luca set the papers down with exact care, as if precision were the only thing keeping him from breaking furniture. "That line is closed now." She looked at him, at the promise in his posture, and felt two truths collide hard enough to leave her breathless. She needed this man's power tonight, and she feared what that need could become tomorrow. "I don't trust easy protection," she said. "I've seen what it costs." "You shouldn't trust easily." His tone dropped, unexpectedly gentle. "Trust should be expensive." The line landed deeper than she wanted. He noticed the way her fingers trembled near the edge of the splint and reached toward her, stopping short. "May I?" She nodded before she could overthink it. He took a sterile wipe from the table kit and cleaned the dried blood near her hairline where the corridor cut had reopened. Movements careful enough to make her chest ache. No possessive grip, no assumption, just focused hands and a question in every touch. Fear stayed. So did the pull toward him. They sat inside both. The secure phone lit on the table, vibrating once. Owen's name flashed. Luca answered on speaker with a look to Ivy for consent. She gave it. "Report," Luca said. Owen's voice came clipped through static. "Intercepted a call tree bounce. Voss wants direct contact with Ms. Chen. He sent a demand, return storage key and ledger copy by midnight, or he leaks fabricated guardianship allegations to family court channels at opening." Ivy went cold. "Storage key?" Luca looked at her. She swallowed. "He gave me a brass key months ago. Said it opened a records locker tied to my debt schedule. I kept it hidden in Leo's old puzzle box. I thought it was leverage I might need." "Do you have it now?" Luca asked. "In my tote, side pocket." "Bring it," he said into the phone, and patched Voss through a controlled line, recorded, 5-minute window. Owen hesitated. "Risky." "I know. I requested this." Ivy cut in. Her voice steadied as she heard herself make the choice. "He has spent 2 years talking at me. Tonight he talks where everyone can hear." Luca's eyes locked on hers. A beat passed. Then he nodded once. "Then we do it your way, within mine." Owen arrived with Matteo Rinaldi 2 minutes later, carrying a signal isolation case and a small audio recorder that clicked red when activated. The brass key sat dull and heavy in Ivy's palm, warmer than metal should be. Distinctive detail, finally named. Not debt leverage. A hook. Matteo set the protocol in plain language. "You stay seated. You do not answer location questions. You do not negotiate timelines. If he mentions the child, you keep your voice level and let me cut if needed." Ivy nodded. No. If he mentions Leo, I answer. Luca's head turned toward her, warning in the movement. Ivy. She met him without backing down. He built his power on me, staying polite and quiet. Not tonight. The line connected on the third ring. Adrian's voice came smooth, almost cheerful. The same public charm cadence that used to make outsiders call him generous. Ivy. There you are. You've made this very dramatic. She kept her breathing even. You called. Speak. A soft laugh. Still formal when you're scared. I miss that. Give them the key and I'll make this easier. You know how messy court can get for unstable guardians. Mateo lifted a hand, ready to cut. Ivy shook her head once. You forged debt in a dead woman's name, she said, each word placed with clinical clarity. You filed false exposure threats tied to a minor. This line is recorded. Repeat anything you'd like the Financial Crimes Unit to hear. Silence. Then a lower voice, stripped of charm. Who told you to say that? I learned eventually. From Pellegrini? Contempt sharpened his tone. He'll use you and discard you. You think you're special because he put guards at your door? Luca stepped closer, one hand braced on the sofa behind Ivy, not touching her, presence filling the room. When he spoke, his baritone was quiet and lethal. Listen carefully, Voss. You will not contact her again. You will not approach the child. You will not route threats through court, staff, or proxies. She is under my protection. Adrian exhaled a brittle laugh. Protection sounds a lot like ownership in your mouth. Luca didn't blink. Then hear it clearly. She is not yours to pressure, Bill, or bruise. Not now. Not ever. Ivy felt the words like impact, fierce and dangerous, and, in this moment, exactly the shield she had needed. She lifted the brass key into view, though Adrian could not see it, grounding herself in tangible choice. You don't get to name me collateral anymore, she said. You don't get to build cases on my family. I'm testifying. The line crackled. Adrian's restraint finally slipped. Testify, and you won't make it to the courthouse. Mateo cut the connection immediately and handed the captured file to Owen, who sealed it in an evidence bag marked with time, date, and chain initials. Physical evidence logged. External contact attempt contained and logged as evidence. No one spoke for 2 seconds. Then Luca turned to his chief. Forward recording and threat transcript to Financial Crimes Liaison and Family Court Security Desk tonight. Priority flag. Already routing, Mateo said, phone in hand. Ivy released a breath she had been holding so long her ribs hurt. Luca crouched in front of her again, gaze fierce and unwavering. Boundary is set, he said. He crosses it, I end the crossing. She nodded, drained and steady at once. In the doorway to the bedroom, Leo stood in borrowed pajamas. Fabric wolf clutched to his chest, eyes heavy with sleep, but alert enough to read tension. Ivy opened her arm, and he came to her. Luca stepped back to give them space, then looked at Ivy over Leo's bowed head. 48 hours, he said, softer now. And this time, you don't face them alone. Leo's small fingers twisted in the fabric wolf as he looked from Ivy to Luca, reading strain even through sleep. Ivy shifted to make room on the sofa, and Leo climbed against her uninjured side, cheek warm against her shoulder. Luca stepped back another pace, giving the child clear air and distance, then nodded once to Mateo at the door. Bedroom perimeter only, Luca said quietly. No radio spill. Mateo moved, and the hallway settled into a muffled quiet again. Ivy stroked Leo's hair until his breathing slowed, then rose with care and carried him to the bed. When she returned, Luca was standing by the coffee table with the evidence bag in one hand. the forged contracts in the other, reading both like he was mapping damage. At 9:37 p.m., Mateo came back with Owen and a tablet loaded with camera stills. He laid out facts in clipped lines. The blonde floor manager had used a cloned credential and a burner earpiece. Her real name was Serena Dax, a courier on Adrian's payroll. The shaking valet was a temp hire named Mateo Ruiz, with no violent record, paid to keep Corridor C clear and to leave the Pellegrini portfolio where Ivy would see it. The unmarked bike rider in event livery had dumped his jacket in an alley and been picked up 3 blocks west. His phone held a single instruction thread tied to Adrian's lieutenant. The young accountant from the hallway, pale and shaking, had given a formal statement and identified Serena's badge swap on security footage. Loaded looks and missing explanations folded into a coherent chain. Mateo turned the tablet toward Ivy. One more thing. The image ping you deleted was recovered server-side. It was your building door with tonight's timestamp and Leo's school dismissal schedule overlaid. He wanted you panicked and moving alone. Ivy felt the room tilt for a second and steadied herself on the sofa arm. Then, he still thinks fear makes me predictable. Luca looked at her, sharp and waiting. She reached for the brass key on the table. This opens a dock records locker at Pier 41. Adrian said it held my payment schedule. I checked once from outside and saw freight tags, not bank files. If he used it as a dead drop, there's a backup ledger there. She turned to Mateo. Patch financial crimes and your captains. If they only hear this from Luca, Adrian will call it internal politics. If they hear it from me with chain evidence, he loses room to lie. Mateo glanced at Luca. Luca held Ivy's gaze for a long beat, then gave a single nod. We run it with police present and body cams live. You speak once, then you stay behind my line. Agreed, Ivy said. And my independent counsel gets copied in real time. Already in motion, Mateo said, sending the message. By 11:18 p.m., rain had thinned to mist over the river, and the dockside warehouse smelled of wet timber, diesel, and cold iron. Ivy stood behind a stack of shrink-wrapped pallets with Luca on her right and Mateo on her left, while plainclothes financial crimes officers held the outer doors. Inside, Adrian waited near a portable projector rig with 3 captains, 2 armed men, and the brittle smile he wore when he thought he still controlled the script. He spread his hands when he saw her. You brought witnesses. That's new. Ivy stepped forward into the light before Luca could reposition her, the strategic move deliberate and visible. You wanted the key, she said. You get the truth with it. She handed the brass key to Mateo, not Adrian. Mateo opened a hard case on a crate and removed a sealed envelope recovered from the locker 10 minutes earlier. 1 encrypted drive, photocopies of forged debt contracts in Ivy's mother's name, and route sheets matching the manifests from Luca's private room. He held each item up for body cams and logged timestamps aloud. Physical evidence accounted for, chain intact. Adrian's smile thinned. Photocopies proved nothing. Ivy took the encrypted drive, plugged it into the projector laptop, and entered the password sequence she had memorized from the copied flash data she had uploaded the day he cornered her. Columns of numbers filled the wall. Rerouted shipments, skim percentages, shell vendors, payout initials, and side-by-side scans of forged signatures. The captains went still. One of them, heavy-set and gray at the temples, stepped closer to the light. That's my route code, he said. You billed me loss coverage for cargo that arrived full. Adrian's charm cracked. You trust an interpreter over your own accounts? Ivy clicked to the next file. Audio waveform, then transcript from the call an hour earlier. Threats against her, threats tied to family court, explicit demand for key and silence. Financial crimes officers watched from the door with tablets up. Adrian moved fast then, crossing the gap and grabbing Ivy's upper arm hard enough to pull her off balance. His breath hit her cheek, sour with adrenaline. "You always forget who taught you consequences." Luca was already in motion, voice dropping to a baritone barely contained. "Release her. Do you understand me?" Adrian drew a compact pistol with his free hand and fired toward the ceiling as he dragged Ivy sideways. The shot cracked through the warehouse, deafening in the metal space. Security answered instantly. Adrian jerked, lost grip, and went down hard near the projector stand, weapons skidding under a pallet. No graphic aftermath, just abrupt stillness and shouted commands. "Hands visible. Police, do not move." The two armed men dropped flat. One captain kicked his own sidearm away and raised both hands. Matteo pulled Ivy behind a steel column and checked her arm, then signaled clear to Luca. Luca's chest rose once, controlled, before he turned to the officers. "Primary shooter down," he said. "Evidence remains in place." Financial crimes took over in practiced sequence. Photos, bag tags, serial numbers read aloud. The brass key entered as item 11B, the encrypted drive as 12A, forged contracts as 12C through 12H, call recording and transcript mirrored to police storage with checksum verification on site. Matteo added the recovered image ping metadata and burner phone thread. External reports received immediate outcomes. Family Court Security Desk acknowledged the threat packet and assigned protective screening for morning filings. The liaison officer confirmed Adrian's surviving network contacts were flagged for no contact orders tied to Ivy and Leo. At 2:06 a.m., an emergency judge signed a provisional order freezing the disputed debts pending fraud review. By 8:40 a.m., in a narrow family court chamber that smelled of paper and old varnish, Ivy sat beside a new attorney from Legal Aid, Mara Calder, independent and blunt, while Rice observed from the second row. Leo waited with Rosa in a side room with coloring pencils and a carton of milk, safe and bored in the ordinary way children should be. Judge Henley reviewed the overnight packet, then looked directly at Ivy. "Ms. Chen, are you prepared to affirm these statements under penalty of perjury?" "I am." She spoke clearly through each answer. Her mother's death date, Adrian's forged contracts, custody pressure, threat call. The court clerk marked exhibits while a bailiff remained at the door under the new security memo. 10 minutes later, the judge signed temporary sole guardianship to Ivy, voided collection actions linked to fraudulent instruments, and referred the fraud file to criminal court. Outside the courtroom, Ivy leaned against the hallway wall and closed her eyes as the order packet warmed in her hands. Rice approached, but stopped at a respectful distance. "Two outcomes before I leave," he said. "First, the blonde courier, Serena Dax, is in custody and talking. Second, the valet, Mateo Ruiz, accepted a coercion plea and gave a full statement. He never knew your name. He knew only female interpreter." "What about Paolo?" Ivy asked, remembering the man in the chair and his warning about stairwells. "Transferred to Federal Protective Holding," Rice said. His look in that room paid off. He was scared because Adrian had already scheduled 2 cleanup teams. She nodded, thread closed. By late afternoon, she stood in the management office of her old building with a cashier's check and a copy of the court fraud order. The landlord's representative, suddenly polite, accepted partial arrears, rescinded eviction proceedings pending the fraud case, and signed a release allowing her to terminate the lease without penalty for safety relocation. Ivy took the signed release, photographed it, and uploaded it to 3 places. When she reached the townhouse again, Leo was at the kitchen table rebuilding his craft stick bridge with Owen as reluctant assistant. He glues better than you, Leo informed her solemnly. Rude, Owen said, and Leo grinned for the first time in 2 days. That evening, after Leo fell asleep with his wolf under one arm and the finished bridge on the dresser, Ivy found Luca on the back terrace under a heat lamp. Jacket off, tie still absent, city noise softened to a distant hum. She held the court order and lease release in one hand, the secure phone in the other. All conditions met, she said. Leo is legally with me. Debts are frozen for fraud. I keep my hospital shifts. Independent counsel stays. Luca looked at the papers and then at her. And where do you choose to live? Protected townhouse for now, she said. In my name, with exit terms I sign. It's done. She studied him in the amber light, the man who had terrified her in a private dining room, and then moved heaven, law, and steel to keep a promise he had delivered badly, but honored completely. Your world is still dangerous. Yes. I won't vanish inside it. His answer came immediate. I don't want you vanished. The words settled between them, not soft, not casual, but clear. Ivy set the secure phone on the table and stepped closer, close enough to feel the stored heat in his skin without touching. Then we do this deliberately, she said. No commands where conversation is possible. A faint, tired curve touched his mouth. I can learn. She believed him because he already had. Inside, a guard changed shift with quiet footsteps, and the house remained on protocol. Cameras live, doors reinforced. Danger acknowledged instead of denied. Safety was real and conditional, exactly as she preferred it. Ivy looked through the glass toward Leo's room, then back to Luca. I'm not disappearing, she said. He held her gaze, voice low and steady. You're not deciding alone anymore. She nodded once, accepted the terms she had helped write, and stayed.